Donna Flor and her two husbands, that's been showing for the last week at the Sag Harbor Cinema. So it's going to be a free-form conversation between Bruno and Julia. And along the way, if you have questions for Bruno, type them into comments, and Julia will insert them in or get to them at the end of the talk. So enjoy, and thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane, and thank you so much, Bruno, for participating in this conversation. You were 20 when you made this movie. Is this your second, possibly third film? And
third. It was my third feature film. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me, and for the opportunity of taking place and doing this. And it's always rewarding to see what people think of your film. Above all, if it's a film that you made 46 years ago or something like that.
But what prompted you to adapt Jorge Amado's novel? I mean,
well, this, as I said, Donna Flor was my third feature film. The first two films I made were films that I initiated. Tati the girl, and The Rising Star. And after that, and they did quite well. I mean, the first one I did when I was 17, and it was shown in the theaters, and it did great. It performed really well, good reviews and good box office. And then I went on to do like a sort of an expensive project when I was 18, which was a musical period piece, kind of like the Star Rises, but anyway, the Brazilian version. Not The Star Rises, what was it called? The film that just Lady Gaga just did.
Star is Born.
The Star is Born. It was kind of like The Star is Born, but it was called The Rising Star in Brazil. Anyway, but in that genre. And then after that, my father, who had produced the first feature film, but not the second one, because he thought, oh, a period piece, maybe it's too much for you. Then I went to another producer and got it. And he said, why don't you do Donna Flor? He had bought the rights of Donna Flor and Her Two Husbands, the Jorge Amado book, for Glauber Rocha to do it. But Glauber then changed his mind and didn't want to do it. So my father just, had the rights, and he had paid, he had bought the full rights. And I said, okay, I read the book, and I started as like, okay, I'm gonna, try to do a comedy. My first two films weren't a comedy. And comedy, as the dying Victoria, in the Victorian age British actor said, dying is easy, comedy is hard. So, and then, as I read the book and as I started to work on the script, it became my film. I really appropriated it, and I could see a lot of myself in the characters, both characters, Varginho, the first husband, and the second. And anyway.
But the husbands.
The husbands, of course.
But the husbands. Well, you mentioned Glauber Rocha. He, of course, was one of the great figures of Cinema Novo. The Brazilian incarnation of the French Nouvelle Vague. And can you give us a little bit of a feel of what was happening in Brazilian cinema at the time? And Donna Flor is a kind of a different film that way.
Yes. The Cinema Novo, which was the new cinema, which was very much influenced not only by the Nouvelle Vague, but also by the Italians' neorealism. Actually, the beginning of Cinema Novo, which is Nelson Pereira dos Santos, the great master, in my opinion, the master of all the masters in Brazilian cinema and one of the greatest in the world, he was very much influenced by the Italian neorealism. And but then, as the Nouvelle Vague, became very trendy and famous and fashionable. Anyway, then it started to become more like, the Nouvelle Vague, and it was like an idea in your head and a camera in your hand. That was the motto of Cinema Novo. And so that way, the scripts and the stories weren't that strong, in my opinion. It was not very it wasn't about storytelling. It was more about ideas and using cinema to convey those ideas. And I like to tell stories. I'm a storyteller. So that's one of the reasons why I also went to books. And my first, second, and third film were based on novels.
And it's very, Sonia Braga, which is the protagonist of the film. She was a star in a telenovela, Gabriela, which was also an adaptation of a Jorge Amado book. Is that why you cast her? I mean, she's incredible, but this is her first big movie, right?
Yes. Actually, it took me 1 year to cast her, because initially we said, no, Sonia Braga, no, because she's too identified as Gabriela, which was the character she had played in the novel in the soap opera with the same name. And it was huge, huge. I, after that, did a film of the same story with Sonia and Marcello Mastroianni. Yeah. But, which is not a film I like. It's a film that I think it's a bad film. But anyway, Doña Flor. So we cast. Then I started to test and read, a lot of other actresses, and I couldn't find it, the Doña Flor. And then almost like a year had gone by, and I said, the writers, the screenwriters, and I said, well, wait a minute, because she did Gabriela, doesn't mean that we cannot change her, cut her hair, and she can put some weight and become, because Gabriela was this wild, very sexy, sensual woman, and Doña Flor had to be this very prim bourgeois, right, the wife from the middle class of Salvador, Bahia. And yes, then we did a test, and we, cut her hair. No, we sort of put a wig just to see what her hair would look, shorter, and it worked.
And was it common in Brazil at the time to have a female character with such a free and exciting relation, free and relationship with her sexuality that would acknowledge it?
No, it wasn't. No, most films of the Cinema Novo and all the commercial films produced before and during the Cinema Novo, because even though the Cinema Novo became very famous worldwide, the Brazilian commercial cinema continued, and they were mostly, the chanchadas, as we called, which were like broad comedies, and that were very successful in the box office. But the main characters were mainly male, not female. The female characters were always supporting characters. So that was, but my first two films also had, two female characters as protagonists. Tati was the story of a single mother, and The Rising Star is the story of a girl who wants to be a radio singer in the 40s, and she's from in the outskirts of Rio. She's from a poor family, but she's ambitious. And people say that the novel upon which the film was based was actually about the early stages of Carmen Miranda's career, because the writer who wrote the novel had an affair with Carmen Miranda, was involved with Carmen Miranda before she left for the States.
We have a question on Facebook that ties in of something that I also wanted to ask, and which is about the visual of the film, stylistically. I mean, the film is set in Bahia, like most of Jorge Amado's books. Can you describe to us that world, and how did you portray it? What were the stylistic choices that you made to give the look of the film? This very lush, beautiful, saturated look.
The first thing I did was to look, there are quite a good amount of artists that come from Bahia, like Pansetti. The name is Italian, but he lived there. Caribé, and the most famous and the you know, the most worldwide known is G. Cavalcanti. And so I went to look, above all, I was very much inspired by the early G. Cavalcantis, the ones made in the 40s, you know, which was his, you know, his golden era, his golden moment. And they were very, very saturated, but kind of monochromatic, which I didn't want because the film was a comedy and I wanted the film to be colorful, but not, you know, carnival colorful like. I wanted, you know, there should be like above all to punctuate, you know, to underline the moods, you know, when she's happy with Vadinho and then the first husband, then when she's sad and lonely, when she's a widow, and then when she's married but bored again, and you know, and then when it comes back. So I want to sort of have 4 different styles, you know, visually, but all in the same color palette. So that was very, and Anísio Medeiros, the art director and costume designer, he did both. He was really, and so that was very, we talked a lot about that and how we would, you know, create these 4 moods within the same color palette.
As a very young director, beside the painters, was there any filmmaker that influenced you in this particular film?
Very much. I had been a big fan, as I said. I come more from the Italian neorealism than Nouvelle Vague, and for me, I was always a fan of Pietro Germi. You know, for me, this is, Fellini used to say, and Fellini was his assistant, that he didn't become more known than Monicelli because he never joined the PCI, which was the Italian Communist Party. And not a lot of people know, but Monicelli's first hit, which was Il Compagno, I don't know the title in English. The most famous Monicelli was his first feature film. That was written, prepared, and shot the first day by Germi, but then Pietro Germi had a heart attack, died, and Monicelli finished it. And that was Monicelli's biggest hit. I mean, biggest hit, first and huge hit.
Is that Big Deal on Madonna Street?
I don't, maybe. It's the story of 3 friends. There's Marcello Mastroianni, you know, and they are just like Il Vite, no, it's not the Il Vitellone, that's Fellini. Anyway, so Pietro Germi was very much my reference, you know, because what I love about Pietro Germi is the tragic comedic side. You know, it's funny and it's tragic at the same time. And as Mel Brooks said it, you know, comedy is you on the sidewalk and you see someone walking down the sidewalk on the other side of the street and someone falls into a hole. Tragedy, you're walking down the sidewalk and you fall into the hole. So it's the point of view that counts. So Pietro Germi has been always my master when I do comedies.
When I was watching again the film the other day, I was wondering if Sonia, what questions Sonia did have about her character, and were there times where she said, "Well, this is just not what a woman would do," or you know, not believable? Was there? Can you tell us a little bit about your conversations with her on Doña Flor?
Yes, absolutely. That brings me to the biggest challenge for the screenwriters and myself, which was when we were adapting the novel, which was how do we go, how do we stay right on, how do we walk this fine line between respecting the whole folkloric, style of Jorge Amado, which you know, Bahia is like, you know, New Orleans or Louisiana, you know, you have black magic, so it's a mystic place, and sometimes things happen that you can't explain. So how do we not, as intellectuals, rational intellectuals, say, oh, this is bullshit, you know, there's no such a thing, and at the same time, how do we, the story has to work for those who believe that it's a projection of Dona Flor. It's a wishful thinking. She's missing her husband, and all of a sudden she sees his ghost there. So that was the hardest thing, because we didn't want to take, a stand one way or the other. And my direction to Sonia was very much like that. I said, Sonia, I think it's because you miss your husband, and then you see his ghost, and all the scenes with the ghost are very realistic. I didn't want to, because the more real it is, the more absurd it becomes, right? And she totally got it, but she said, no, I'd rather think that it's because of Bahia and the candomblé and the black magic. I don't want to, make it psychological. I said, okay, that's your choice. I respect it.
The film was, you were telling us me before, the film was censored in Brazil at the time when it came out, correct?
Yes. Yeah, many cuts.
Many cuts for, I presume, the sexuality.
Yes, just the sexuality, absolutely, yeah. Above all, that scene, which is the very final scene of the section in which I tell her life with Vadinho, the first husband, is told, and it's when they're having anal sex, and I mean she which was kind of a synthesis of her life with Vadinho, because it was pleasure and pain all the time.
But the film was released internationally in your cut, and it was a huge success in New York, correct?
Oh yeah, it was. It opened, and I actually have a picture here of the opening night at the Paris Theater in February 1978. It was an event, and then Studio 54 was closed down for a big party, a big bash with Halston, Bianca Jagger, Robert De Niro, Liza Minnelli, and all running around and crazy, and everybody had gone to see the movie too. It was playing the Paris Theater for almost 6 months, 4 months.
So it was international. It became bigger internationally, and then it went back to Brazil. Is that correct? Or?
Yes. No. It opened here. It broke all the records. It was the biggest box office hit in Brazil. At the time, only Jaws had done 200,000 more, sold 200,000 more tickets. Jaws had been released just like 6 months earlier, and then it went on to open worldwide, but in the U.S., in Italy, it was a huge hit too. It was practically a huge hit all over the world. Yeah.
And it was a Brazil #1 until Titanic, correct?
No, I mean, in the first run, Jaws outsold by 200,000. Then Titanic, yeah. Then because it played again, and then only Titanic beat it. Yeah.
We have a question from Betsy Ross. Hi, Bruno. Wonderful to see you. It was fantastic to get transported to Bahia and feel the moment where Dona Flor was filmed. Were there any part cuts that you feel would have been great to keep to change a film in any way? Can you tell us about them now? I mean, were there scenes that you didn't include at the time and that you feel they would be in the film today?
No, not cut by the censorship. No, I mean, cut by me, right? When I was doing, I imagine.
I think
I'm very tough on myself, and I usually my cut is shorter than the final cut, because then the producers or the distributor come to me and say, "But hey, what about that scene? Are you crazy?" So I get too critical of my own material, and I usually I cut too much, and then I put stuff back. But on Dona Flor, I didn't leave many scenes out. I don't, now 45 years later, I don't remember what scenes I had left, but I don't remember leaving you know, it's something that as a director I always do. And I said at the time when it was filmed, you would look at the cutting room floor or the bins and say, oh my, 5 days, you know, thrown out, or a week that could have been used, all that money, you know. So I always pay a great deal of attention to, you know, how many days I wasted and I could have used the money somewhere else. And in Doña Flor, I used, I would say maybe 95% of what I shot.
Wow. Wow. Music is very important in your films. And can you tell us why you chose Chico Buarque and explain a little bit to our followers who is he in Brazilian culture?
Yeah, that was a bit of a problem for me later, maybe, you know, for a long time in my career, because as people know, Bahia has great composers and great musicians, and Chico Buarque is not from Bahia. Chico Buarque is actually from São Paulo, where I live, but he grew up most of the time in Rio. And I chose Chico because I wanted something that was not, you know, local. I don't know how to explain that, and that's a rationalization today. At the time, I identified myself more with Chico because Chico's songs, they always tell a story, you know, and Caetano, who I, you know, respect a lot and admired, and Gilberto Gil, who would be the natural composers, right? For the story, their lyrics were a little too sort of scattered, not scattered, but fragmented. Mm-hmm. And I wanted something that had more of a beginning, middle, and end. So that was, you know, the reasons why I went to Chico initially, of course. And then Chico fell in love with the film and kept coming back to the editing room and watching it again and again. And he said, I'm going to make a new genre, which is a tesamba, which means tesão plus samba. And tesão is, you know, to be turned on. So it's a turned on samba would be the right translation in English. And you know, and O Que Será Que Será became so, maybe it's one of the greatest, it is definitely one of the greatest hits of Chico's career, that people think that the song existed and I just used it for the film, but it was actually made for the film. Yeah, yeah. We have
a question from on Facebook. Bruno, great to see you. This is Tobias, Portuguese professor in New York City. Doña Flor continues to be one of my favorite films to recommend to my students, particularly because Flor was so ahead of her time. She enjoyed sex and had her own business, something unheard of in Salvador in 1943. How aware were you of the women's liberation movement in the States?
Well, this is 1975 when I did the film, you know, and I was 20 years old. So I was well aware of everything that was happening. And I traveled and I was getting married to my first wife, Susie, who actually plays a little cameo as an American in the casino scenes, the blonde there, and anyway, and so I used to go to the States a lot, and so I was well aware of the, you know, the liberations movement and all of that. So I thought that would, although the story took place in the 40s, you know, it would play well with what was going on in the world, above all in the US at the time.
And this is following what you and I were discussing prior the conversation, the public conversation started. It feels that watching the film, it feels like we live times that are almost more prudish than, you know, 1975. Do you have the same impression? That's what I thought when I was looking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, life goes in cycles, right? And we're just going through a very, very prudish cycle, and hopefully we'll get out of that soon. But you know, it's at the time we were going through that too. in Brazil. That's why we were under a dictatorship, and that's why the film was cut. And then later in 1994, when I went to China for the first time, and it was the very first Shanghai International Film Festival, the film was shown there with cuts too. I didn't know, unbeknownst to me. I introduced the film at the first screening and all that, and then I wanted to stay and watch a little bit of the reaction of the audience, and then the distributors there and the festival organizers finally said, "Oh, I have to tell you this, but the film has a lot of cuts and all that. I'm sorry," they were embarrassed. But and that was 1994 in China. So it depends also where you were. But now in our days, because of the communication and internet, it seems that the whole world is going. So we're very much in sync, right? And going through this prudish moment all at the same time.
We have a question from Ralph Gibson. One time you told me that once you're shooting, you don't give the actors much direction as they spend much more time with the character. Was that true with Sonia? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Sonia, Vilker, casting is crucial. I mean, casting is a big chunk of your job as a director. And so when I start to shoot, I think that the actor, has done his homework and is so prepared that I listen a lot to the actor. As Meryl Streep says, 45% of the directors don't know what they're doing and they get in the way. The other 45 don't know what they're doing, but they don't get in the way. And 10% know what they're doing. So I totally agree with that. The best direction sometimes is just to zip up.
We've been talking a lot about Sonia. Can you tell us about casting the two lead male actors, especially because at the beginning of this conversation, you said that you identify with both of them.
Yeah, because I have those two sides. I can be very anal and obsessive and compulsive, obsessive, like Teodoro, like maybe any filmmaker or a lot of filmmakers. But at the same time, I have a very sort of like, free, Dionysiac, sexuality in the sense of like, of being adventurous and exploring. And I think that that's Varginho, right? And I love also I think that the ideal for every woman would be the two of them, right? A little bit of accountability and reliability, like with the second husband, and the adventures and romantic side that Varginho had, because he was a romantic. He comes and he sings to her, and but at the same time, I'll never forget. And Sonia was with me. There was a screening in Berkeley, in California, of Doña Flor at the time, like 79, 80. And Sonia and I were almost beaten and really hit physically by a group of feminists that came to the Q&A afterwards. Tom Luddy, who organized it.
Yeah.
And we had to sort of like be whisked away through the back door and get into the car because they were like really angry.
because they thought she was too submissive to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She should have kicked him out and that's very funny. That's very funny.
You see, it's all about the time and the context.
Yeah. You often say that one of your favorite filmmakers is Francois Truffaut. Why?
Because he's romantic, and because most of his movies were about women, as most of my movies, and I think that the female being really instigates me, and I need to be instigated to tell a story and to make a good film.
But you haven't only done comedies. I mean, you've been able to sort of surf in different genres, right? You've done some romantic comedies like this, and you know, if I can call this, and bossa nova, and then you've done other genre. You seem to be quite comfortable with choosing different type of films.
Yeah, I'm a storyteller. You know, I'm not an auteur, so to speak. You know, I find myself in the stories. I only want to tell stories if I'm curious about the characters in them. You know, so I'm never going to tell a story that is about me or something that I lived, because, you know, I know too well, and I'm not curious about it. So I'm not saying that Woody Allen, Almodovar, Bergman, you know, Fellini, they're always making one way or the other the same film. They're always telling the same stories, and I admire, you know, their films. But that's just not who I am. I think that roughly you could practically divide, you know, the filmmakers between, you know, the auteurs and the storytellers. I'm a storyteller, but that doesn't mean that the films I make are not personal, because I do end up finding myself a lot in the stories I tell.
And you've worked both in Brazil and the United States. And can you tell us a little bit about the chronology of your professional life there and here, and then going back to Brazil?
Well, I went to the U.S. not because I wanted to make it in Hollywood. I went to the U.S. because in 1989, when Collor de Mello, the other crazy the president we had, besides the present one, took over, and the first thing he did was he closed down the Amber Film, which was the main, you know, agency that supported filmmaking in Brazil. So I you know, I couldn't do what I couldn't earn my living doing what I knew and I was good at. So coincidentally, I was offered a film in the US, which was A Show of Force by Paramount, and it was a political thriller because of a film I had done called Amor Bandido, and I went, and then I fell in love with Amy, and we got married, and we had a beautiful son, Gabriel, and then I stayed there and making films there. But I even though I was living there, I did 4 days in September here in Brazil and Bossa Nova, and during those I would say 15 years that I lived there. So that was the chronology, you know, but I loved working in the U.S. and I became an American citizen. Today I feel like I'm a citizen of the world. I don't feel at home anywhere, and that's, I'm not complaining. I just, you know, I feel at home in New York and São Paulo because there's towns, cities of immigrants. That's all.
And you spend your time a little bit in the States and a little bit in Brazil, correct?
Yeah, between São Paulo and New York, yeah.
And you were at the Sag Harbor Cinema with one movie, if I'm not wrong, which Mary Jane produced, and she told me in summer 2013 you had a screening of your last film, Reaching for the Moon.
Yeah, which was just an unforgettable screening. People that I respect a lot. It was one of the very first screenings. So I was still finding out what film I had done, and Mary Jane and Ralph organized that screening, and it was great. And I'll never forget Lou Reed walking out of the theater crying, and he grabbed my hand and said, "Thank you, thank you." Was deeply moved. He walked away.
That's wonderful. Well, our plan before the you know, everything changed was to have you in person at the cinema. So we'll have to find another reason to have you there. Can you tell us what are you working on right now?
I just finished a big project which is called The American Guest, which is a 4-hour miniseries, 4 installments of 1-hour miniseries for HBO, and it's about Theodore Roosevelt,
Wow.
going down a river in Brazil in 1914 with his son Kermit. Aidan Quinn played beautifully, brilliantly Theodore. And Chris Mason, a British actor, played Kermit, and Chico Diaz played Rondon, the colonel that was hosting TR. And that was a very sort of a traumatic, kind of a swan song for Theodore Roosevelt, because it was right after he lost the election for Woodrow Wilson, you know, when he divided the Republicans in the middle, because, you know, he created the Bull-Moose Party, the Progressive Party, and then the Democrats came back to power in 1912. And that's an epic, but at the same time, it's an intimate story about father and son, you know, squaring off. And because Kermit had been in Brazil after a couple of years because he didn't want to watch his father run against his best friend and successor, who was William Taft. So it's a drama, but it's a jungle. It's not a jungle film. It's a drama in the jungle. There are adventures, there are action scenes and rapids, but that's not what the narrative, the film is about. I call it a film because it's like a 4-hour film.
I have a question from April Gornick. Do you shoot different for television than for cinema?
Well, you shoot faster, a lot faster. Instead of 4 pages a day, which is already kind of fast when you're doing a feature, for 5 pages a day, you have to shoot, you know, 7, 8 pages a day. In the jungle, when we're doing the American Guest, because of the logistics, we couldn't shoot more than 4 or 5 pages a day. But when I came to do the interiors in Sao Paulo, and there were a lot of them in sound stages, and a lot of the White House and the Sagamore Hill, we rebuilt the interior of Sagamore Hill in a sound stage in Sao Paulo.
In Sao Paulo.
Yeah, and it's pristinely made by production designer Juliana Overmeer. And the wardrobe was designed by Mary Jane and Marcassiano too. So but that was all done in Sao Paulo, as if we were in, you know, we didn't need to go to the States to shoot that. Even some exteriors we did here. So then I was shooting like 8, 9 pages a day. So basically it's faster, but I shot it as if I was shooting a film, and it looks like that.
When we'll be seeing the HBO piece?
It should be now with what's going on and the coronavirus. I don't know, but it was originally scheduled to go on air in 4 Sundays of July. The first 4 Sundays of July. Maybe a little further down. Yeah.
I have a question which goes back to Doña Flor, I think, from Tom Cohen, and he's asking if it was difficult for you to work with the producer on that film.
Of Doña Flor?
Yes.
Yes. It's very hard to work with your father, above all when you have a strong father. That's why the American Guest, I would like to dedicate. I didn't, because, but I should have dedicated it to my son and my father, because sometimes I feel like I am Theodore Roosevelt, and sometimes I am like Kermit, and that's why. And I see, when I'm Kermit, I see Theodore like my father. My father is a very strong figure and a great producer, wonderful photographer. But it was hard. But thank God I was in analysis since I was 13, so I was able to. Stand my ground, and fight him, and, hold my ground and fight him and get what I wanted.
And your mother is also a producer and has produced some of your films, correct?
Actually, she produced most of my films. The only film that I did that my father produced was Doña Flor. And then, although they worked together, but then, we just, we butted heads a little bit too much. We were very strong, both of us. I love him, and I get along better with my mother as a producer. So she produced most of my movies.
And what's their difference in producing style?
Well, because my mother, she is more focused on the script and the development, on the, you know, on the storytelling, you know, and that's the way I am too. It's not because she asks me, no, but at least she listens more to me, and we are more similar. We have our views of human behavior sort of more intersect more. But my father is sort of a more like a political guy, more, you know, in the macro thing, and which you know, for a director filmmaker, you know, you go from the detail. Sorry, you go from the detail to the whole.
For the last several years, Latin America has been an incredible source of cinema, you know, exciting filmmaker. Can you tell us from Brazil what we should be looking for? What are the new voices that we should be expecting to discover soon, or the ones that maybe we don't know yet and we should look for?
I mean, there are a lot of, there are quite, if not a lot, but there are a few very good filmmakers, young filmmakers in Brazil. I like a lot the work of Laís Bodansky. I think her latest film, Like Our Fathers. I mean, I'm translating the Brazilian, the Portuguese title literally, Como Nossos Pais, Like Our Fathers. I think it's a beautiful film. I think it's a jewel. I was so moved, and I think it's one of the best Brazilian films. One of the good films I've seen, you know, lately. And it was released a year ago, a couple of years ago. But I like Kleber Mendonça's first feature film, the Sound Around, the Son Redor. I don't know if that's the title in English. I like it a lot. And I think he's very talented, and he's a great filmmaker. And
let me just, he just did a movie that was released in the United States shortly ago, which is called Bucará.
Right, and I haven't seen it yet. I was very busy finishing The American Guest, and I wanted to see it in the theater, because I know his films, you know, when you're a great filmmaker, you should see, you should have your work seen on the big screen. So I didn't want to see it in my, although I have a very good home theater, I didn't want to see it here. But I didn't make it to and it was still playing. And then the coronavirus closed all the theaters and I couldn't see it. But the reason why I didn't see it is because I wanted to see it in the theaters. And I will, I'm sure it will still be playing. And, but I also like, there's what's his name? Coimbra, I forget his first name now, who did The Wolf Behind the Door. O Lobo Atrás da Porta. Mary Jane might know his name. And he's a very good filmmaker, very good director as well. That was like 3 years ago too.
And since you mentioned the beauty of going to the movies and watching them on a big screen, which is what we'll be offering in Sag Harbor, I want to go back for a minute to before finishing to Doña Flor to ask you, what are the details of this restoration that you did for the film's new release?
Well, what I just learned, because I haven't seen it, right, this restoration. And because it was done, I think in the US, I haven't seen it. But what I was told, and which was just, you know, my sister who's running the family company who produced the film, found out that it was done from an old master, you know, that wasn't done from the most recent master that was on 5.1 Dolby Stereo, and which I personally remixed, you know, in 2005. I was living in the US, no, in 2004, just before I moved here. I came down and I spent like 3 months here remixing the whole film in 5.1 sound, and Murilo Salles, the DP, the director of photography, you know, retimed it, everything, and it was all done on film and then transferred to digital. So they didn't have access, for some mistake, they didn't do make the 4K from that, but they are making it now.
And so we will be able to see it.
It will be replaced very soon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we'll put it up on our big screens. And until then, I think I want to thank you for this great opportunity to meet from afar, and hope to have you there. Maybe with the American guests, we'll do something special for it in Sag Harbor.
That would be great. Yeah.
And thank you again.
Thank you all for having me here.